Elite Facts presents
10 of the greatest PlayStation 1 games of all time.
10.
Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. We're starting the list off with something where sure will annoy a small minority of people, but just hear us out. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 is a rare case for a video game. When it comes to most sports games, they only seem to grab the attention of people who like that particular sport. However, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 is a sports game that manages to capture the attention of all audiences. The reason for this is because it was just so ridiculously over the top with its arcade style of gameplay, fantastic level designs, including an amazing Roswell level for all you Alien enthusiasts, tight controls, as well as having great selection of licensed music. And hey, this game is still among some of the highest rated games ever, as it's only rated behind The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, Soul Calibur, and Grand Theft Auto 4 on Metacritic's website. Now that's impressive.
9.
Gran Turismo 2. Now, for its time, the PlayStation 1 was groundbreaking with its graphical capabilities. However, as time went on, and you can pretty much say this about any console, the games just looked dated. Well, this game is no different, but man, at the time, Gran Turismo looked like the most realistic game the system had to offer in both graphics and gameplay, as the game wasn't just another arcade-style racing game, but more of a racing simulator that included the most realistic car controls you could imagine, while also, for the time, presenting itself with the most realistic graphics that were offered back in 1999. What made this game even more impressive, however, was how much content it had, as the game featured well over 500 licensed vehicles, tons of tracks, and just provided what was a phenomenal racing experience. That's like the equivalent of 3 whole season passes in today's market. Hell, probably even more, thinking about it.
8.
Oddworld: Abe's Odyssey. Now, we were really tempted to put Abe's Exodus on this list instead of Abe's Odyssey for the simple fact that the game includes a save feature that the first game desperately needed. However, the story of Odyssey is far, far better than Exodus. Abe's Odyssey is not only one of the best platform games the PlayStation has to offer, with some people actually choosing this game over the likes of Spyro and Crash Bandicoot, but it's the style of the game that gets our attention, with its dark, grisly atmosphere accompanied by one of the most charming characters the PlayStation 1 has to offer in the form of Abe. Honestly, the Oddworld games are incredible. If you're able to, definitely check them out.
7.
Tekken 2. So Tekken 1 is dated drastically, there's no question about that. However, for its time, it was a competent fighting game, and it did lay the groundwork for a fantastic sequel in the form of Tekken 2. Unlike Tekken 1, which was released 1 year earlier on PS1, 2 years earlier in arcades, Tekken 2's fighting and presentation was polished to the point where it could be considered one of the system's best fighting games.
6.
Silent Hill. This one is from back when Konami used to be cool. Released in February of 1999, this game was essentially Konami's answer to Capcom's popular Resident Evil franchise. Silent Hill was their first in the survival horror genre, and it was critically praised. However, the game managed to distinguish itself from Resident Evil by concentrating on adventure-style gameplay and a heavy emphasis on character and storyline. Not to mention, it allowed more camera freedom than the more cinematic and restrictive fixed camera angles presented in the Resident Evil games. It was commonly thought of as one of the scariest games on the system, and it had what was arguably one of the best stories on the system.
5.
Crash Bandicoot Warped. Oh boy, you could not believe how close we were to putting all 3 games on this list. Hell, we were even incredibly close to including them all as one item on this list due to how consistent the series was back then. However, we thought that would be cheating and decided to go for what arguably is the best game in the series, Crash Bandicoot Warped. Now, you could argue that the second game is better, and personally speaking, we do in fact prefer the second game most. However, the third game not only uses the same formula as the second, but adds more gameplay styles. So you've got your standard 3D platforming segments that the Crash Bandicoot series is well known for, thanks to its interesting level designs and responsive controls. However, Warped also includes new gameplay segments such as motorcycle races and dogfight segments. This is, without a doubt, one of the best in the series.
4.
Final Fantasy VII. Now, before we start with this portion of the list, we need to just say that we're only doing 1 game per franchise with this list. If we did allow more than 1 game per franchise, half of this list would be taken up by Final Fantasy. Now, it's a preference thing with these games, as it does tend to change its style up with each numerical release of the game. However, we've decided to go with Final Fantasy VII for this spot due to the sheer fact that it is the most beloved game in the franchise. Very rarely will you hear anyone complain or criticize this game, because if anyone did, you'd never hear from them again thanks to its loyal fan base. Now, this game is pretty damn flawless. I mean, it has to be. It's the 7th game in the franchise. With Final Fantasy VII's historic release on PlayStation in June of 1997, role-playing games were finally given the respect that they deserved, and the RPG genre is now one of the most significant and defining on the system. Following the story of Cloud Strife, gamers were taken on a fantastical journey that arched over 3 discs and included well over 40 hours worth of gameplay. Back then, that was impressive, and it's still impressive now considering most games average 6 bloody hours in this day and age. It's incredibly easy to see why most people have this game as their personal greatest game of all time.
3,
Metal Gear Solid. This list was incredibly difficult to make. The PlayStation 1 had plenty of classic titles that still hold up well to this day. Hell, we had to leave a few off of this list that we know we're going to regret in the future. That being said, however, we can't forget the one PlayStation 1 game that has held up well after all these years after its release. Of course, we're talking about Metal Gear Solid. Considered to be the crown jewel of the PlayStation 1, Metal Gear Solid is said to be Hideo Kojima's magnum opus. Then again, in all fairness, you could probably say that about any of his games at this point. The game, which followed the exploits of Solid Snake, was an action-adventure game that relied heavily on using stealth and had a presentation that was superior to anything else on the platform. It not only lived up to the hype, it exceeded it in many ways. An espionage game of this magnitude hadn't been seen on the market up until this point, making it one of the most influential games to the stealth and action genre that we know and love today.
2,
Resident Evil 2. Now, many may argue that Silent Hill 1 is better than Resident Evil 2. However, it's sort of a preference thing, really. Personally speaking, both games are equally as good as one another. With that out of the way, Resident Evil 2, oh dear God, yes, this game is just the purest essence of survival horror. So, building further off of the foundation of the first game, Resident Evil 2 not only uses the same formula as its predecessor, but also manages to somehow do it even better. Set in the middle of a city and inside of a now zombie-infested police station this time, the player is tasked with battling hordes of the undead, having to figure out several puzzles, and doing all of this with only a limited amount of supplies and ammunition to sustain them through their journey out of the police station and out of the city. Besides the gameplay being on point, although being a bit complicated at first for newcomers to the series, as well as having amazing visuals for the time and some of the best music you could expect from a survival horror video game, the game also had so much replay value that you'd find yourself playing the game for days or even weeks after your first playthrough. Even to this day, Resident Evil 2 is being praised by fans and critics alike as the game holds up well still to this day. Hopefully, we'll hear some news on that imminent Resident Evil 2 remake any day now.
1,
Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Now, if you honestly want to talk about a swan song to an ever-beloved game franchise, look no further than Castlevania Symphony of the Night. What's that? There were more Castlevania games after this one? Well, yes, that is true, but in all fairness, Symphony of the Night is probably the last true Castlevania game to be released, with the exception of a few Nintendo DS titles such as Dawn of Sorrow and Portrait of Ruin, which were decent games in their own right. But with the transition to 3D, the series lost a lot of what made the old NES and SNES games so damn good, the challenge, and to some extent the overall game's atmosphere. Symphony of the Night not only encapsulates what the original NES and SNES titles had, but cranks it up to 11. The gameplay is simply on point, as not only does it stick to its side-scrolling roots, but it also incorporates role-playing elements such as swapping between different characters who have different abilities. But you are also able to level up your character's abilities. Add to that some amazing visuals, intense boss fights, and some of the most badass music to appear in a video game, and you're sure to have a hit game for sure. Are there any games you remember fondly from the PlayStation 1? Let us know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.
Don't forget to like us and subscribe for more Elite Facts.